Diary of a Wimpy Kid is the fourth most sold book series of all time. It sold over 300 million copies at the time of me making this video. There's 20 books in the series with 6 spin-offs and 8 movies. Book 21, Rolly Jefferson's Awesome Friendly Spooky Stories 2, and an animated movie for The Getaway released later this year too. It's a great year to be a Wimpy Kid fan. The books have also been translated into over 70 languages, so they're all around the world. That's an insane amount, and new translations come out from time to time. For instance, the Hindi translation released in November last year. It's a pretty recognizable book series, so there's a good chance someone will know what it is if you bring it up to them. Did you know it was even parodied by The Simpsons at one point? So when did it all begin? To answer this question, let's go all the way back to when the author, Jeff Kinney, was young. Luckily for us, Jeff's younger brother, Patrick, wrote a biography about him. So, who is Jeff Kinney? And by extension, Greg Heffley? Just like you and me, Jeff has parents. Their names are Patricia and Brian Kinney. On February 19, 1971, Patricia gave birth to Jeff. Brian was a few minutes late for the big moment, so he was a little disappointed. But his disappointment faded into proudness when he saw Jeff. Jeff weighed 10 pounds, which is quite a lot for a newborn, so he was very healthy. Brian was an officer in the US Navy and Patricia was a full-time mother. At the time, they had another son and daughter named Scott and Anne-Mary respectively. Since he was the youngest, Jeff's siblings would sometimes play pranks on him. When Jeff was around 7 years old, Scott woke him up very early on the first day of summer vacation. He told Jeff he needed to get ready for school because he slept through the entire summer and even missed the family trip to Disney World. Jeff initially believed him, but he realized a few minutes later that it was just a joke. Does that sound a little familiar? If you've read the Wimpy Kid books, you might realize there's something similar in the first book. In fact, the same thing plays out basically word for word with Greg and Roderick. This isn't the only time Jeff uses his personal experiences for inspiration in the books either. We'll get into that later though. When Jeff was 3 years old, the family moved to Fort Washington in Maryland. A little while later in 1976, Jeff's younger brother Patrick was born. So now he wasn't the youngest in the family anymore. Jeff got along really well with Patrick. For fun, he'd sometimes make mazes out of pillows and blankets for Patrick to crawl through and have fun with. In the summer, they both slept in the basement where it was nice and cool. When Patrick was a little older, they both stay awake at night with Jeff cracking jokes and making up silly stories. Sometimes they'd laugh so hard that their dad would yell at them to knock it off and go to bed. Jeff loved his little brother, but sometimes he'd do things that got on his nerves. Jeff even thought he was a little spoiled since he never got punished. One time, Patrick drew a life-size drawing of himself in permanent marker on the pantry door in the kitchen. Jeff really thought that his parents would punish Patrick for this, and he couldn't wait for them to see it. However, that's not what happened. They loved the drawing so much and never even painted over it, even after the house was sold and they moved out. Jeff thought this was completely unfair because he definitely would have gotten punished if he'd done the same thing. You've probably guessed by now, but this is also another joke in the first Wimpy Kid book. Manny, Greg's little brother, draws a self-portrait on Greg's bedroom door and gets off scot-free. I think it's pretty cool how Jeff can turn an annoyance from his childhood into a pretty relatable joke. Younger siblings aside, Jeff really loved reading. A novel he was pretty fond of was Judy Blume. He could relate to the stories like having a little brother and really liked how Judy Blume used humor to describe situations in real life. In fact, that's probably where he got many of his ideas for jokes, like the Manny one I just went over. Jeff's father also had a whole drawer filled with comic books. The copies of Uncle Scrooge by Carl Barks were Jeff's favorite back then. Another comic strip Jeff liked a lot was Calvin and Hobbes. The comic books showed Jeff a lot about what makes good storytelling and comedy. His father also loved the morning funnies and would always leave the Washington Post newspaper open on the comic page for all his kids to see. If there was a particular strip that he wanted everyone to look at, he'd crop it out and stick it on the refrigerator. By being surrounded by all sorts of funny things, you can tell where Jeff got his humor from. The Kinney family would read the comic collections over and over again, and nowadays the books are all beat up from all the love they've gotten. Jeff also really liked to draw, even when he was little. His favorite subject in elementary school was art, and even when he wasn't in art class he'd keep drawing with his countless sketch pads. Everyone in school thought he was really talented, which made him proud of himself. However, his 5th grade teacher, Mrs. Norton, offered him advice on how to improve instead of immediately congratulating him. He was pretty used to getting praised at that point, so it was a little surprising to him. He still listened to Mrs. Norton though, and his drawings improved even more. Mrs. Norton also helped Jeff see comedy a little differently. When Jeff and a few of his friends were practicing for the school talent show, Mrs. Norton walked in on them goofing around. The boys were wriggling around in a bunch of sheets that was sewn together, which was supposed to be a giant snake. They thought it was hilarious, but in reality the act wasn't really that funny. Mrs. Norton gently tells them that there's a difference between people laughing with you, and people laughing at you. Jeff knew what she meant by that. Looking like a goober wasn't real comedy. You can tell he looked up to Mrs. Norton because there's a recurring teacher named after her in the Wimpy Kid books. Jeff also learned that humor came from paying attention to the world around him and being a spectator. This realization would help him create the world of Diary of a Wimpy Kid and Greg Heffley many years later. Jeff states, "I was never the best student or the best athlete, but I was always an observer. I never felt like a participant. I just quietly watched and listened to what was going on around me." Even though Jeff liked the same things as many other kids, such as playing sports, he'd still try to get out of team practices through some clever means. For example, he remembers swim practice not being very fun since it was early in the morning and pretty tiring. I can't say I blame him because I'm sure a lot of us would prefer to stay in bed early in the morning. One day Jeff realized that there's no way the coach would be able to keep track of every individual kid at all times. He'd ask to go to the bathroom and hide there until practice was over. There was a problem with this though, and that was the temperature of the bathroom. It was freezing cold, and plus he just got out of the pool, so his solution was to wrap himself in toilet paper and sit on the toilet until it was time to go home. Jeff says, "I wouldn't say I was a wimpy kid, but I definitely had my wimpy moments." Jeff attended Eugene Burroughs Middle School, and it was a pretty strange experience for him. He wasn't the smallest or biggest kid, but he was somewhere in the middle. However, what set him aside from his classmates was his art. It was so good that even Jeff's teachers thought everyone should see it. They asked if Jeff could keep some of his best drawings in the display case in the lobby so more people could see them. One day, Jeff's little brother really wanted people to admire Jeff's drawings too. Without asking, he took one of Jeff's sketchbooks that had Star Wars characters in it to school. Patrick would be correct about his friends liking the drawings. They even offered to buy them, which Patrick was totally fine with. But when Jeff found out, he was pretty furious to say the least. In fact, I bet this joke from Cabin Fever was inspired by a similar incident. In 1985, Jeff's mom would buy a home computer. It was a pretty new thing at the time, so not many people owned one. Jeff was fascinated by this and wanted to know how the computer actually worked. He ended up teaching himself how to be a computer programmer and made his own games. His parents couldn't get him off the computer since he was so immersed with it. In fact, when he got in trouble one time, he was grounded from using the computer. That didn't stop him from still doing computer-related things though. He would write programs by hand on a sheet of paper and later copy it onto the computer. Jeff looks back at this memory nowadays and laughs because it's the most rebellious thing he did in middle school. Jeff's computer skills and interest continued into high school at Bishop McNamara in Forestville, Maryland. One summer, the University of Maryland even hired him to develop a computer program. This was huge for Jeff, because he realized that his understanding of computers was a pretty valuable skill. This could even lead to him getting a job where he'd do coding and programming. In high school, Jeff was a top student. He graduated third in his class, which is pretty impressive. He enjoyed English class and his interest in art was still very strong. But despite being a very good student, Jeff still felt like an outsider or an observer. For example, when he was on a soccer team, he thought it would be fun. Unfortunately, his coach was anything but fun. He yelled a lot and would punish players for disobedience. Jeff didn't understand why his coach was like this, and neither do I, to be honest. One time when Jeff and some other classmates were drinking water, the coach yelled, "Get your butts over here." Jeff, being the jokester he is, did literally that. He ran to the coach with his butt sticking in the air, but his coach didn't find it that amusing. It wasn't directly stated what happened next, but I have a good idea of what probably went down thanks to the last straw. Jeff quit soccer after a while when he decided he wasn't a good fit for the team. On Jeff's last year of high school, he had to decide what university he would attend. Thanks to his grades, he could choose from some of the best schools in the country. Unfortunately, college can be very expensive and the Kinneys weren't rich at the time. Luckily, the United States Air Force offered a full scholarship to Villanova University in Pennsylvania, and Jeff could go for free. It was a no-brainer decision, so Jeff agreed. The U.S. military pays for hard-working students to go to college in exchange of having to receive special training and staying in the military for a couple years after college. For Jeff, that meant he'd join the Air Force. Jeff actually enjoyed himself over in Villanova, and he involved himself in the campus. He wanted to help out with the campus newspaper and write crossword puzzles, but they weren't looking for that at the time. So Jeff offered to write a cartoon strip instead, and the editor liked that idea. Even though Jeff had never been a cartoonist before, it came pretty naturally to him thanks to his drawing skills and his love for comedy. He came up with Igdoof, the name of the main character of his strip. Igdoof was a freshman in college, just like Jeff. He had to deal with the obstacles of college life like getting to class on time, studying, and living with a roommate. Igdoof is a pretty interesting piece of history in the context of Diary of a Wimpy Kid. There are many jokes that would later be reused in some way in the Wimpy Kid series. These jokes would also be targeted more towards college students rather than kids, so there's some things that aren't very appropriate for a younger demographic. Here's a few examples. The art style also feels familiar, yet pretty different from the Wimpy world we know today. If you'd like to see me cover Igdoof and its correspondence to Diary of a Wimpy Kid, I'm planning on making a video about it after this one. If you subscribe, you'll be notified when it gets uploaded. Plus, I'm a pretty small channel so any support helps me out a lot. Thank you very much. Now let's get back to the video. Jeff really loved being a cartoonist for the campus, but now he also felt like he wasn't very suited for a career in the Air Force. He wanted to be creative and make people laugh instead, so he was faced with a dilemma. In the end, he decided to make the tough decision of giving up his scholarship to Villanova and instead start attending the University of Maryland. There, he hoped Igdoof would live on. At first, things weren't looking so good. Jeff wasn't able to get Igdoof into the school's newspaper called the Diamondback for over a year. The Diamondback was known for having some of the most talented college cartoonists in the entire country, so Jeff really had his work cut out for him. But one day, Jeff would answer the phone and get greeted with some great news. One of the 3 cartoonists decided to quit, so this was Jeff's big chance to take their spot. Igdoof was an immediate success. Thousands of students read the strip every day. It was so popular that other colleges on the East Coast started putting it in their own newspapers. This was like a dream come true for Jeff. He loved going into the dining hall and seeing the other students read the daily strip. Jeff wanted to go even further with his cartooning, so he started writing letters to professional cartoonists asking for advice. One of these cartoonists was Lincoln Pierce, the author of the Big Nate comic strip. Big Nate was one of the comics that Jeff liked reading in the Washington Post newspaper. Mr. Pierce really liked Jeff's work and gave him lots of tips, like not cramming too many words into the speech bubbles. One Sunday, when Jeff opened the comics section of the Washington Post, he saw that day's big Nate strip. He couldn't believe it. One of the stickers shown on Nate's notebook was a sticker of Igdoof, along with Bart Simpson and Garfield. The comic strip is an in and out guide written by Nate. The ins would be things you should do, while outs are things you should avoid. Igdoof was on Nate's notebook with the description, in, putting cool stickers on your notebook. Jeff wouldn't forget this kind gesture from Mr. Pierce. Jeff really liked all the attention he got from having a popular cartoon, but it also wasn't easy coming up with new material. He had to come up with something new every day for 5 days a week. Thinking of a funny idea was hard, then he had to draw it with a pencil before inking it with pen. Sometimes Jeff would have to stay up all night trying to fill in the 4 panels that Igdoof was structured upon. He didn't have much time for sleep or schoolwork because of this. Even though it was a struggle to balance both the comic and college, Jeff managed to graduate in 1993. He'd written almost 300 strips at the time, and he put them all together in this book called The Igdoof Bathroom Companion, and it would be his very first book. All the copies quickly sold out, and he even had a book signing at the university bookstore. I'd imagine they're worth a fortune nowadays. The book was never re-released, and it doesn't even have an ISBN number you can look up. It was probably independently published by the University of Maryland. After he graduated, Jeff started mailing samples of Igdoof to every cartoon syndicate in the country. While he waited for responses, he had a lot else going on in his life. In 1995, he got married and moved to Massachusetts. This is where his wife, Nicole, was attending law school. Jeff got a job as a graphic designer for a newspaper called the Newburyport Daily News. After that, he began working for a company called Up to Date, where he would develop computer software for doctors to make good decisions when treating patients. It wasn't his dream job, but he still enjoyed his time there. He liked playing pranks on his co-workers, like calling his friends at the company and pretending to be a confused customer. Unfortunately, Jeff and Nicole's marriage didn't end up working out, and they got a divorce in 1998. He did finally hear back from the cartoon syndicates too, but sadly they weren't interested in Igdoof. Things were looking pretty grim for a while. To keep his cartooning skills sharp, Jeff would start a journal. He wrote down everything, like funny stories that happened that day. He'd pair his text with little doodles to illustrate some of those funny moments. This is when inspiration struck, and Jeff had an idea that would change everything. A lot of the rejection letters from the cartoon syndicates mentioned that they were looking for professional artwork, and Igdoof didn't really fit the bill. In Jeff's journal, his drawings were simple and looked like drawings that kids keep in their school notebooks. That was it. Jeff had an idea for a book, a journal from the point of view of a child with simple illustrations to accompany them. He knew what kind of child he'd be writing about too. A Wimpy Kid. He titled the book the name we all know so well today, Diary of a Wimpy Kid. Jeff was very excited and couldn't wait to get started, but he also couldn't be too much of an eager beaver just yet. He recalled Mrs. Norton's advice from elementary school, which was that before starting a project, he should plan it out first. Instead of writing the book right away, Jeff bought another notebook. He'd fill it up with every funny experience and idea he could think of. He'd only start writing the book when the notebook's been completely filled out. Jeff thought this would only take about a month or 2, but it actually took 4 whole years. By the time the entire notebook was filled out, it was 77 pages long and full of characters, jokes, and story ideas. The pages were so jam-packed with material and you practically needed a microscope to read them. I wouldn't be surprised if Jeff got hand cramps from writing that small. But this was perfect. Jeff had plenty of ideas to start his book now. Jeff pictured this book to be very long, being between 700 and 1300 pages long. He wanted to write it for adults who'd enjoy being reminded of what it was like to be a kid again. It never even crossed his mind that he would be writing a children's book. Since his dad loved comics so much, Jeff grew up thinking that comics were more for adults than for kids. He thought reading the comics every morning was just an adult activity that he was allowed to enjoy as a kid. This had a big impact on how Jeff wrote Diary of a Wimpy Kid and what kind of audience he thought he was writing for. Here's a few examples of some things that never made the final cut. In the 4 years of coming up with ideas for his notebook, 2 big events happened in Jeff's life. In 1999, he got a new job of developing online games for a company called Pearson Education. This company owned a website called Funbrain. Jeff would help create fun and silly games to help kids learn. One of these games was Ball Hogs, where kids were tested on their math skills. Kids would play as pigs called ball hogs and be tested on how quickly they could solve math problems. When a correct answer appears, that's when they would jump at the tennis ball before their opponent does. You can see Jeff's signature art style with how these characters are designed too. Oinkster kind of resembles the pig from Diary of a Wimpy Kid: The Long Haul. This footage is from Ball Hogs 2, the championship, because I unfortunately can't find the first Ball Hogs. If you get an answer wrong or if you're too slow, you'll fail and the other pig gets a point. Whoever gets 3 points first wins. Anyway, the second other big event happened at a friend's dinner party. There, Jeff would meet a woman named Julie Cullinane. They started dating, and in 2000 they would get married and move to a house in Plainville, Massachusetts. In 2002, they would have their first child named Will, and in 2005, they would have a second one named Grant. Every day after work, Jeff would go down to the basement and write. He wanted to use only the best ideas from his notebook to write Diary of a Wimpy Kid. Deciding what was funny took a while, and after spending 4 years writing down his ideas, it would take 4 more years to write his first draft of the book. The more he worked on the draft, the more his characters would take shape. The Heffley family was a lot like Jeff's own family growing up. There was a dad who was interested in the Civil War and a teenage son who played drums in a rock band. However, the Heffleys were more like a funhouse mirror version of the Kinneys, where their personalities were greatly exaggerated. Greg himself was becoming an exaggerated version of what Jeff said his worst qualities were as a kid. Jeff's childhood moments of acting selfish or foolish helped make Greg become a pretty believable character. Greg is like a twisted version of Jeff himself. In fact, I'm sure everyone has their own version of Greg inside them. What are your worst qualities and worst moments? If you create a character based on that, you have your own version of Greg Heffley. Other characters in the Diary of a Wimpy Kid universe are purely fictional. A character like Greg, who isn't always the nicest person, needs a best friend who's the exact opposite. That's how the idea for Raleigh Jefferson came to be. Raleigh's kind, loyal, and isn't in a hurry to grow up. He doesn't realize when he's being wronged, so he can be taken advantage of quite easily. As for Fregley, he was also completely made up. Jeff says that everyone knows a kid like Fregley, and if you don't, you might actually be the Fregley. Working on Diary of a Wimpy Kid has had its ups and downs. Jeff's basement was very cold and damp, and a lot of the time he'd go downstairs to write only to find out that rain or snow flooded the room. On these terrible days, he'd question if all his hard work would pay off someday. He wasn't ready to give up though. One day he wanted to be able to go to a bookstore and point at his book saying, "I wrote that." Jeff's family and friends hoped Diary of a Wimpy Kid would eventually get published too. Jess Brallier, Jeff's boss, was an early fan of the book. I bet there was some confusion with names at the workplace. One day Jeff suggested that maybe he could offer bits of his book on Funbrain, and Jess agreed. It was an experiment that would prove to be worth doing. Jeff would post one of Greg's journal entries each day to the website and it blew up in popularity. Kids and adults from all over the world would get on Funbrain every day to read Greg's newest entry. This version of the book would go on to be nearly 1,300 pages long. Jeff got a lot of emails from fans asking questions or telling him how funny his stories were. Jeff was very happy to know that Diary of a Wimpy Kid reached places as far as Japan and Saudi Arabia. This would greatly boost his confidence in the book's success. This version of the book is a pretty fascinating read, because you can see the bits and pieces of the early Wimpy Kid entries in this book combined into one big story. There's a lot of cut content and even some parts of Igdoof are in there as well. But like Igdoof, this is a topic I'd like to cover another time. Please let me know if you'd be interested in me doing a deep dive into the Funbrain version in the comments below. Personally, it's my favorite entry in the Wimpy Kid series, even if it's not an official release. Anyway, let's get back to Jeff. In 2006, Jeff's boss Jess suggested that he travel to New York City to attend Comic-Con. Maybe he could meet someone there interested in turning Diary of a Wimpy Kid into an actual book. It started out a little discouraging, as Jeff wasn't allowed in on the first day because of how overcrowded it was. On the second day, he brought a sample of his book. He managed to get in the building this time, and showed the book to every publisher he came across. Unfortunately, nobody seemed interested in it whatsoever. It felt like Igdoof all over again. Right when Jeff was about to give up, he saw a booth in the last aisle of the convention center. It was a booth for a publishing company called Abrams. Earlier that day, Jeff overheard that Abrams recently turned a webcomic into a book. So his chances were pretty good with this publisher. Still, he was nervous when approaching them. Jeff introduced himself and asked if they'd like to see a sample of his work. Charles Kochman agreed to take a look at it. After flipping through the book a little bit, Charles looked up and told Jeff, "This is exactly what we're looking for." After the convention, Charles took Jeff's sample to his editorial team. Everyone there thought it was perfect. Just think, if Jeff decided to give up before talking to Charles, Diary of a Wimpy Kid might not have been published. In fact, to show him his thanks, book number 8, Hard Luck, is dedicated to Charles. This was huge news. Jeff finally got a publisher that would publish his book. Not just that, but they wanted to make Diary of a Wimpy Kid an entire book series instead of having one entry. Jeff was overjoyed to hear this. The next comment they made took him by surprise though. Abrams wanted to make Diary of a Wimpy Kid a children's book. As you know, Jeff thought he was writing for adults this whole time. This was a bit of a revelation to him at the time. Charles was now Jeff's editor. They worked together for the next couple months making the first Wimpy Kid book. It was a lot of work, because they had to compress the original 1,300-page book into 224 pages, with 217 pages being the length of the story itself. On April 1st of 2007, what a fitting release date by the way, the first Diary of a Wimpy Kid book released. At first, things didn't look so good. At a public event to celebrate the book's release, only Jeff's family and Charles' friends showed up. You know how the story goes though. It didn't take long for things to take a complete 180. Everyone was buying the book. Just 2 weeks after the book released, it became a New York Times bestseller. It was now one of the most popular books in the country. Jeff's dream was finally coming true. Many kids who didn't even like reading couldn't put these books down. Diary of a Wimpy Kid was also a big hit in other countries too. Like I mentioned at the start of the video, there's over 70 translations of the first entry. Jeff especially seems to love the Brazilian translation, which is called Diário de Banana. He even describes Greg's body as a banana when he shows us how he draws Greg.
Most of the time, Greg is doing something that's getting him into trouble or making him unhappy, and it's usually his fault. And you can see I curved Greg a little bit. I wanted to make sure you knew that he's a wimpy kid, and he doesn't stand perfectly upright. And I think that my Brazilian publisher really picked up on that, and that's why they called it Diário de Banana. He's sort of shaped like a banana, right?
In 2009, Jeff would be included in the Time magazine's list of the 100 most influential people. Congratulations, Jeff. In Plainville, there was an old building there that made the entire town look bad, so Jeff and his wife decided to transform it into something special. In 2015, Jeff would open his own bookstore in its place. The bookstore would be called An Unlikely Story, and it's still open to this day. The second floor is where people could hold parties and other events, while the very top floor has Jeff's own studio. The studio has all kinds of cool stuff, but my favorite has to be their foreign book library. They try to have at least one copy of every translated Wimpy Kid title for their archives. This is something I'd love to see for myself one day because I enjoy looking into the different translations of the books. I also plan on making a video about them at some point. If you want to know more about their studio, the Wimpy Kid official YouTube channel and Instagram made some videos touring it. If you live in Massachusetts or are just visiting there, you should stop by An Unlikely Story if you're an avid Wimpy Kid fan like myself. That's the story of how Diary of a Wimpy Kid became as popular as it is today. Jeff faced many struggles, but he never gave up, and his book series went on to sell over 300 million copies. As of today, there are 20 books, 6 spin-offs, 4 live-action movies, and 4 animated movies. This year, there's also going to be a few new releases which I mentioned earlier. I'm glad to see the series still thriving to this day. For those of you who watched all the way to the end, thank you. I'm a very small channel, so any bit of support helps out a lot. This video took a long time for me to make. I have a lot more Wimpy Kid topics I want to cover in the future, so if you'd like to see more, please consider subscribing. If you don't feel like subscribing, I'd like to ask if you could hype the video instead. You can even do it up to 3 times on one video. It helps out more than you might think. Thank you so much once again, and I hope to see you next time.